designed 60 years ago are highly stressed. Our nation's struggle to cope with all of this is what brought together the Project for National Security Reform. This is a bipartisan, nonprofit group working to improve the way the United States protects itself against that broad range of foreign and domestic threats. Our aim is simply to improve American security in an unpredictable world. The project is led by a guiding coalition, as Richard mentioned, of more than 20 former government officials and other experts with extensive national security experience. I'm one of the members of that guiding coalition. As Richard also indicated, former Defense and Congressional and White House official Jim McLaughlin, who is here today, has been the driving force behind this effort and serves as its executive director. Well, as you can tell from my earlier comments, we believe the national security system created in 1947 is outdated and needs significant restructuring. We're studying this national security system with the support of Congress. The study is being conducted by more than 300 people, including researchers at think tanks, university professors, and lawyers. Many have spent years working for the federal government in the national security field. Now, we realized early that to develop well-tailored solutions to problems facing the national security system, we first needed a detailed understanding of those problems. We didn't want to operate the way Washington normally does, that is, proposing solutions before the problems are understood. So the project's preliminary findings, issued at the end of July, provide this understanding by pointing out specific deficiencies in the national security system today. As Richard mentioned, you can find that report at www.pnsr.org. Our project will recommend solutions to Congress and the next president in another report coming out later this fall. We expect these recommendations will point toward legislative amendments, draft executive orders, and suggestions for amendments to House and Senate rules. Now let me briefly summarize 8 of our key conclusions. There are more, but I've picked out 8, bearing in mind that this report deals only with problems. First, we concluded that our government is able to build impressive capabilities in individual departments and agencies and disciplines, military, diplomacy, intelligence, economic, but lacks ways to integrate them as rapidly and efficiently as required by today's problems. In contrast to much of the 20th century, nearly every problem we deal with today requires constantly shifting coalitions of expertise from multiple departments and agencies. Terrorism is the clearest example in requiring efforts by all the agencies I mentioned, but other examples abound. Combating the spread of unconventional weapons requires an integrated approach by specialists in intelligence, energy, the Pentagon, and diplomacy, as do the provincial reconstruction teams that work in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, to some degree, it's always been this way. But now, all events are moving more rapidly, and coping with them demands more agility than our existing system can efficiently and consistently deliver. Second, the U.S. government has lots of security experts, but they don't add up to a national security workforce. What I mean is that, particularly in our civilian agencies, we don't have many people cross-trained in more than one field and intimately familiar with the capabilities of other agencies where they don't work. The focus is on their expertise and careers in individual cabinet departments and agencies. In other words, few people are trained to work in what might be called interagency space, the area where most of today's national security problems fall. Third, this pushes nearly all the job of integrating capabilities into the White House. That in turn proves overwhelming for an extraordinarily hard-working but very tiny staff that has only advisory authority over tens of thousands of people working on national security. The result is that most effort goes into day-to-day emergencies, allowing most issues, many issues, to turn into crises. Governments have made many efforts over the last 60 years to improve the national security system. These include creation of the Situation Room in the White House to cope with crises, reorganization of the Defense Department, establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, creation of the Director of National Intelligence, many other steps. But these changes have often been driven by events and have addressed specific problems in isolation. The result is a fragmented and disconnected system that is poorly adapted to address current national security challenges seamlessly and successfully. Fifth, Congress is organized for oversight in a way that generally matches the executive branch and tends to reinforce those vertical structures and processes that inhibit speed and agility in policymaking. The result is that Congress does a poor job overseeing national security activities that involve more than one department. That is most of today's issues. And no single person in the executive branch, other than the President and Vice President, is now designated to testify on Capitol Hill on such interagency activities. Sixth, our government produces many thoughtful planning documents. The Quadrennial Defense Review at the Pentagon is probably the best known. But we don't yet have an overarching national security strategy that assigns priority to issues, integrates the efforts of all of the agencies, and aligns funding with missions. That makes it very hard to make decisions about resource trade-offs and national security. Seventh, as implied by that, resources are not realistically aligned with missions. Former Deputy Secretary of State Rich Armitage and Harvard professor Joe Nye pointed this out in their study called Smart Power, their term for the integration of civilian and military tools. Defense Secretary Gates has also stressed that we don't put enough emphasis on what he called the civilian instruments of national security: diplomacy, strategic communications, foreign assistance, civic action, economic reconstruction and development. Now, in today's tight fiscal environment, we may be talking less about an increase than about rebalancing of assets among military and civilian tools. Finally, our effective use of information is inhibited by a variety of things left over from the piecemeal way in which our national security system has evolved. These include many different sets of rules for classifying information, different sets of rules for who gets to see it, and incompatible technology to move this information around our government. So in closing, let me invite you to think about how you would deal with these problems. That's what we're doing now as we ready our next report. And frankly, we're finding the answers are not simple. And experienced people come at them in very different ways. And there's a temptation to conclude that all of these problems can be dealt with through effective leadership alone. While that will always produce better outcomes, the prevailing view in our group is that even outstanding leaders will have trouble making the current system as agile and efficient as it needs to be in this new world. And so, all of us involved are trying to break out of the mindsets